Hi everyone, this is our channel, Meet the Real Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
Every one of us has a talent. It may be singing beautifully, drawing artistically, writing poetically. We're all different. Our special talents make us happy. We are all unique in our own way, living in a world full of peace, love, and happiness. But what if our talent became our bane? Well, my talent did become my bane. Let me tell you how. My name is Jenny, and I'm 16 years old. I lived in a quiet neighborhood with my parents and my little brother Matthew. I didn't have a lot of friends or hobbies. I was only interested in social media, but I always had a feeling that I had something unique, something that distinguished me from others. Turned out I was right. It all started on my grandmother's birthday. My family and I were traveling to her home to celebrate the occasion. The road was narrow and bumpy, with a rocky shoulder on one side and a river on the other. Dad was driving too fast, so obviously, Mom was a bit worried. Conversely, Matthew was excited. It was raining so hard that day that Dad feared the weather might get even worse, so he was driving faster than he should have to try to arrive at Grandma's house quickly. I was worried too, but for a slightly different reason. I had a feeling of impending doom on that trip. The rain got progressively worse. There was almost continuous lightning and thunder. Suddenly, we saw a big truck that had stopped on the road ahead of us. Mom screamed. Dad swerved to avoid hitting the truck and lost control of the car, which had gone on one of its sides and off the road into the river. It was the most frightening situation I had ever experienced in my whole life. We went underwater, and I felt as if we were in an aquarium. Dad was unconscious, and his forehead was bleeding. Mom was struggling, and Matthew was paralyzed with fear, his eyes tightly shut. Then, my vision went dark. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital bed, with a team of doctors around me. When I asked them about my family, the look on their faces told me that I was the sole survivor of that horrible accident. Several days had passed since the accident. I was having trouble sleeping. The doctors gave me some sleeping pills. They even tried hypnosis to help me sleep. Grandma came to visit me. She was very sad. She said I could come live with her. My whole life was turned upside down in an instant. A police officer at the hospital was kind enough to drive Grandma and I to her home. After he dropped us off, something strange happened. In a fraction of a second, I had a vision, a momentary premonition that something bad was going to happen to him. I saw him trying to catch a thief, and suddenly crashing into another car. So I thanked him for the ride, and told him to take care of himself, to be very careful. He smiled, and said that he will. The very next day, as I was watching the news, I saw a report that very same kind officer had died in a car crash, just like my premonition. Grandma was upset when I told her what had happened. I didn't tell her that I had foreseen his death, because I knew that she wouldn't believe me. In fact, she might have even thought I was crazy. This strange turn of events happened again, with one of our neighbors, who visited us one day. She was a kind, lovely woman. I had a premonition that she would die in her kitchen due to a gas line explosion. I urged her to be careful with the cooking gas, because it could be so dangerous. But she just laughed and said that she loved cooking, and that there's nothing to fear. Grandma got a bit upset with me for making a big deal out of nothing. She said that I was just a little paranoid due to the accident, and that my imagination was getting way too overactive, and that I shouldn't try to scare people. Needless to say, the neighbor that I had warned did indeed die in a gas line explosion 4 days later. Coincidence? I think not. Am I somehow causing these incidents to happen? I couldn't help but think that I was somehow linked to the whole thing. I searched the internet for any information about this phenomena, and I found that it was common in people who had been involved in a traumatic experience, especially almost drowning incidents. I read a research that said that parts of the subject's brain would become very active. After our neighbor's accident, my aunt and uncle came to visit us. I had missed them a lot, but yet again, I had a premonition that they would have an accident going home, causing their car to explode and crash into the river. 2 days later, they were preparing to leave and head home. I begged them to stay one more night, but they said that they couldn't because they had work the next day. I told Grandma about my premonition, and she scolded me, told me to stop this nonsense. She thought it was my overactive imagination again. My uncle came in as Grandma was scolding me and asked me what was wrong. I wanted to say, "Nothing important, Uncle. Just premonitions of doom, that's all." But I didn't. I went to sleep instead and had a dream that Uncle was going to get run over by a car. Suddenly, I woke up to the sound of Uncle and Grandma's voices. They were talking about me, and it was raining outside. Uncle stood up and said that he had to get something from his car. I sat up straight and shouted, "No, don't go." Uncle said, "Jenny, it'll be fine. I'll just get something from the car." I couldn't dissuade him from going, so I followed him out. Uncle went out to his car and was standing by its door, which was facing the road. Then I saw the headlights. A car was coming down the road, driving towards us. I saw the car hit a flooded spot on the road and suddenly began sliding sideways, right towards Uncle. Instinctively, I made a decision to try and protect him. I had to at least try. I jumped in front of the swerving car. The driver saw me and tried to regain control. Suddenly, I felt a warm sunshine mysteriously coming down from the sky amidst the rain, and I felt calm and safe. And I had one final premonition before everything went dark.
Let me be honest with you guys. I'm not a fan of first dates. I've only had a couple of good first dates, others are plain disasters. However, from time to time, I like to get on Tinder and swipe between pictures. Tinder dates always turn into funny stories, sometimes even spooky ones. My guy best friend Ryan and I decided to go on a few Tinder dates just for the fun of it. Before we went out, we would always agree on a safe word, and that word was hot dog. A text saying, "Hey, can you pick up some hot dogs on the way?" Or something along those lines basically meant, "Can you call me and pretend there's an emergency so I can get out of this situation without being rude?" We had a lot of safe words meaning different things, and had an unspoken rule that every time we were on a date, we would let the other person know. I met this guy called Brandon on the application. We had a few good chats and decided to go out for brunch. I called Ryan and I let him know that I'll be having brunch with this Brandon guy. I'm not a supermodel, but I'm a bit too picky when it comes to first date outfits. I dived into my closet and decided to wear a bright pink off-shoulders blouse and a tiny little white skirt. And of course, my signature mermaid hue high heels. Brandon texted me saying he knows of a nice Italian restaurant. Despite the fact that we were going out for brunch, I somehow agreed to Italian. The guy comes to pick me up for our brunch date. He looks nice with lots of black on. He says he needs to make a stop along the way. I couldn't really seem to disagree. I mean, he clearly forgot to buy me flowers. So I say it's fine and he can make a stop along the way. He pulls up to a gravesite and I see people and I'm like, okay, maybe he's picking something up from someone, or maybe he works here and needs to do something. What was really going through my mind though is what the heck is he doing and why is he bringing me to a gravesite on a first date? I just waited in the car, especially since there's mourning people nearby and I'm wearing a bright pink outfit. He gets out of the car and opens up the passenger side door. I tell him something along the lines of, "I don't want to draw attention to myself and I'll just wait here." And he says something along the lines of, "Don't worry, you look great. They will love you." Despite my pink outfit and my high heels, Brandon was very well built. He was very tall and had broad shoulders. One could easily tell that he is into martial arts. So I wasn't very worried about my safety. However, I was really worried about his mental health. I'm not even kidding. I was so very curious about what on earth were we doing there at 10 a.m. on a first date. And who is they, as in, they love you? Okay, so the next part is a bit hard to define whether it was creepy, surreal, or a prank show. It was his mother's funeral. I stood next to a group of weeping people watching as my date's mother was lowered into the ground. Needless to say, it was really, really awkward, especially since he kept trying to hold my hand and nuzzle me for comfort. It's a first date, for God's sake. I waited for the service to be over, as I didn't want to be rude to the grieving people or to the dead woman. And then I texted Ryan, hot dog. So Ryan called me and pretended to be my landlord and told me that my apartment was flooded. I quickly apologized to Brandon and called an Uber. While I was waiting for my Uber to arrive, Brandon kept on holding my hand and literally begging me to stay a little bit longer. He also said we could still go out for brunch, but I politely said we could reschedule for another time. I think his cousins or something were standing too close. He told them that we've been dating for a few weeks and they should talk me into staying. I was so glad that my Uber finally arrived. I hopped inside the car like a freaking ninja. I called Ryan and asked him to come over. We stayed together, and honestly, I've never laughed as much as Ryan made me laugh that night. And guess what? Ryan and I realized we were actually in love a few weeks later. We gave up online dating and we've been together ever since.
I don't really like Indian movies because the actors are always overreacting, and the movies are not logical at all. But this is just my personal opinion. However, I've discovered that there are stories stranger than Indian movies. Let me give you a real-life example. I'll tell you a story about a young woman named Samantha. Samantha was a beautiful girl with blonde hair and green eyes. She lived with her grandmother after her parents died in a horrible car accident. The whole country read about it. She had many friends, and all the neighbors liked her. They considered her the most beautiful girl in town. Many had proposed to her, but she didn't care much for them. One day, Samantha was walking alone down the street after visiting one of her friends. Suddenly, she had an eerie feeling that someone was following her. She began running and crying for help. Her follower began running and stopped her. He was an ugly man, pointing a knife in her direction. He asked her to hand over her purse. She threw it at him and made a run for it. The man said wait and made to stop her, but another man appeared out of nowhere and punched the thief, who fell unconscious. The brave and good Samaritan picked up Samantha's purse and handed it to her. He was very handsome, with green eyes, soft hair, and an amazing smile. He escorted her back home, and she felt that he was her knight in shining armor. She went inside and hugged her grandmother tight, who was a little surprised but smiled. Samantha was so happy that she gently pulled her grandmother to her feet, and they whirled around and danced playfully. The very next day, she was surprised when she answered the doorbell. Steve, the tall, handsome man, was standing there, holding flowers. He proposed to her, and she said yes. Thus began their love story. Then one day, Samantha was standing in the kitchen preparing dinner. Steve and her grandmother were out, but they were supposed to be back soon. Samantha had everything ready, and she set the table. The house door opened, and Steve walked in. Samantha went to greet him, but she felt dizzy and fainted. Steve quickly took her to the hospital. The doctor congratulated Steve, saying that he was going to be a father. Steve was ecstatic, but Samantha was not. Instead, she was shocked and nervous. She said that she was too young to have kids, that she wasn't ready to be a mother. Steve was taken aback and said, "But why? Don't you want him?" Things were different from that point on. Samantha tried to get an abortion several times, but Steve was always stopping her. She couldn't accept it. She blamed Steve, but Steve couldn't understand her. In her 7th month of pregnancy, Samantha was with her grandmother at the supermarket when she saw a small boy run onto the road. Fearing he might get run over by a car, Samantha quickly pulled the boy off the road to safety. The boy's mother saw what happened